don't know if I need. Welcome to the League of Women Voters of the South Bend area. Today is our lunch with the League, and we have two very exciting guests. Before I start that, I just want to make sure that everybody knows that we are a nonpartisan organization. We've been around since 1920. Both women and men can join. And we don't support either candidates or parties, but we do support issues that we've studied. And the environment is one of those issues that we've studied in great detail. When I was first in the League, we were doing solid waste, air quality, water quality, and all those things. And we have positions on all of those. And if anyone is interested in joining the League, you can go to our website and find out more about us. So today we have with us two people who are going to be talking about preparing for the 21st century climate change in Indiana. An overview of the Indiana climate change impacts assessment. Dr. Alan Hamlet is an associate professor in civil and environmental engineering and earth science at Notre Dame, and he's a specialist in the integrated computer modeling of climate, hydrologic systems, water resource systems, and ecosystems. And Alex Bazán, who's the sustainability project manager for the City of South Bend Office of Sustainability. And he's been there since January of 2022. He has a diverse background in working with grassroots, consulting, nonprofits, and governments. So I am going to turn the microphone, if there is such a thing on Zoom, over to Alan and Alex, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say to us today. Thank you.
Oops. There. All right. Can you hear me and see? Everything all right? Okay, very good. So Melanie, thanks so much for the nice introduction. My goal today is give you a quick overview of the Indiana climate change impacts assessment, which started in 2018 and 19, and really was focused on providing specific impacts for the state of Indiana related to long-term climate change in the region. I want to just acknowledge quickly my co-authors. Michael Baldwin and I are the co-leads for climate for the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. Huyan Vian was a PhD student of mine at the University of Notre Dame, did a lot of the downscaling work that we used here. Scott Robeson at Indiana University did a lot of data processing and visualization things. And Melissa Widhelm was one of our key outreach specialists with the Purdue Climate Change Research Center. So just for those following up later, here is a, sorry, I'm gonna hide these controls. This is a website here for the Indiana Climate Change Impacts Assessment. So there's a lot of additional reports and information here that may be valuable if you want to dig in a bit more. If you're into reading journal articles, here's one that describes a lot of the things I'm talking about today. And we also have a regional scale analysis for the entire Midwest and Great Lakes drainages. So sort of a larger scale look at what's happening and might be the impacts for example, rivers feeding the Great Lakes. So when we talk about long-term climate, one of the things that we really have to encompass is the use of global climate models, which are sophisticated computer programs that simulate the complex interaction between the atmosphere, the oceans, and the land. So these models are capable of predicting and simulating from first principles the features of the global climate system and how it has evolved through time in the historical record. Now, when we look forward in time, we use the same tools, these global climate models, but we need to think also about how human behavior is affecting the climate system via greenhouse gas accumulation. So in this assessment, we will be looking at two greenhouse gas concentration scenarios. RCP 8.5 is a very high scenario, and RCP 4.5 is a sort of middle of the road scenario. Now, I should note that RCP 8.5 has been tracking right along with what has actually been happening. So what is considered the high end may actually be more along the lines of the middle of the road in reality. So just to keep that in mind. All right, so we feed these two scenarios of greenhouse gas concentrations to the global climate models. We simulate the entire globe, but then we essentially chop out data for Indiana to provide a very local scale view of what's likely to happen in our region. So here's some sort of big picture results. On the bottom here is a timeline starting with 1880 going to 2100. So, 80 years into the future, essentially. And then these are temperature changes in degrees Fahrenheit. Again, so this is the observed line in black. And then we have in blue, that's RCP 4.5, the middle of the road scenario. RCP 8.5 is shown in red. And these pink bands and blue bands that you can see on the figure show the range of uncertainty associated with different global climate models. So there's not just one global climate model, there are many. And this is basically an average of 31 models that we have compiled. So if we look way out at the end of the 21st century, we see on average, averaging all the climate models together, about 10.5 degrees Fahrenheit warming on average. This is a very large number that is associated with major impacts across the globe and also in our region. If we get it together, though, and are able to contain our emissions scenario to something that looks more like RCP 4.5, we may be able then to keep the temperature changes to a much lower value, about half the value. So that would be like around 5.5 degrees Fahrenheit by the end of 21st century. So the point I would like to make is that in the end of the 21st century, what humans do in terms of greenhouse gas accumulation is very important to the outcomes. But if we look over, say, a 20-year time frame from around 2020s to 2040s, you can see that those two scenarios don't look all that different from each other. So what this means is in the short term, we may have little option but to adapt to what is coming. Whereas at the end of the 21st century, what we do with greenhouse gas mitigation, creating renewable energy and so forth, plays a very big role in the outcomes. So if we look now, focusing in just again on the state of Indiana, we see some pretty significant changes coming. So on the top row is temperature change in degrees Fahrenheit. Let's look at the 2080s for RCP 8.5. So we see between 10 and 18 degrees Fahrenheit about as a range. And we see large temperature changes occurring throughout the year. For precipitation shown in the lower row, we see a somewhat more complicated picture where we see wetter conditions in winter and spring. Essentially, all the models show wetter conditions during that time. And we see variable conditions in the early summer and some more intense signal towards drying in the late summer. So in short, we see strong warming throughout the year, wetter conditions in winter and spring, and somewhat drier conditions in summer. Another tool that we use to help understand these kinds of changes is we use a tool called geographical analogs. So what we do is, here's Indiana in its correct position on the map. And so when we look out into the future, for example, to the 2080s, we try to find a place in the United States where the climate looks like the projected 2080s climate. All right, so if we do that in the wintertime, we see something that looks like this outline of Indiana. So we're basically moved Indiana over to where it will have the 2080s climate projected by the climate models. So we see that Indiana will look a lot like the mid-Atlantic states. Southern Indiana will look something like South Carolina, perhaps. And, northern Indiana probably looks something like Pennsylvania or Maryland. Now, if we do the same thing for summer, we see a really large southward shift. So again, here's Indiana where it actually is, and then the analog for the 2080s climate for the high emissions scenario for the 2080s is that Indiana will have a climate that looks a lot like Houston. So this is a huge change. And these, again, are averages. These are not the extremes. These are just the average changes. So if you understand what Houston looks like, you can get a sense of what Indiana's climate will be like. All right, so some key impact pathways in Indiana. So extreme heat and humidity is certainly one. Think about Houston in summertime. Flooding and stormwater impacts we'll see is a major impact pathway that we're already starting to see impacts occurring from that. Outdoor recreation, agricultural impacts to terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems. All of these are major sensitivity areas for Indiana itself. So let's I'm going to focus primarily on extreme heat and stormwater and river flooding as the impact pathways. There are many others that are covered in more detail in the reports, but in the interest of time, I'm going to focus on these two. So what we're doing here, we've taken 3 counties, so St. Joseph County in northern Indiana, Marion County near Indianapolis, and then Vanderburgh County, which is where Evansville is in southern Indiana. Okay, so we see significant difference in climate between northern and southern Indiana, so that's why we want to take these 3 areas. So what we're analyzing here is the number of days per year on average over a long period of time that the number of days that have a high temperature during the day above 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay. All right, so let's look at St. Joseph County, which I think we're all fairly familiar with. So historically, we have typically about 3 days per year that are above 95 for the daytime high on average. If we go out to the 2080s, for the high emissions scenario, we are projected to have 61 days per year, so 2 entire months of 95 or higher. So a huge change in climate. When I first saw these numbers, I sent my PhD student back and I said, there is no way that can be right. You have to figure out what you did wrong. And unfortunately for us, he didn't do anything wrong. Now, southern Indiana is even more dramatic. So again, historical impacts of about 10 days, much warmer in southern Indiana, going up again for the high emissions scenario for the 2080s to 100 days per year. That's the entire summer and some of the spring and fall. So this is you can imagine these are the heat and humidity indexes that are going to result if we see this kind of climate change. So some of the impact pathways related to extreme heat and humidity are human health in cities. So heat waves are actually one of the most deadly weather-related events in terms of human health, kills more people than any other, including hurricanes. And air quality is likely to suffer as well, although there's still quite a bit of work to quantify those impacts. Outdoor work and recreation are serious issues. Agricultural impacts. As many of you are aware, I think corn does not like really high temperatures, so we may actually see shifts away from these traditional crops to cope with this warmer climate. Terrestrial and aquatic ecosystems, so forests, fish, wildlife, all likely to be significantly affected. Also energy supply and demand. So expect to see reduced energy consumption in winter and greater energy consumption in summer. All right, so we've already seen that the projections suggest wetter conditions in the wintertime and spring, and then also somewhat drier conditions in the summer. So this suggests that we might see increased flooding due to precipitation alone. But we also see a lot of a transformation of precipitation falling as snow historically, becoming rain in the future. So what's being measured here is the percentage of precipitation that's falling as snow from November to March. So if we saw 100%, that would mean everything was falling as snow. So for St. Joseph County, for example, about 39% of the precipitation from November to March falls as snow. And not surprisingly, as we go forward towards these warmer and warmer temperatures, we have less and less. So by the 2080s, roughly less than half of the amount of precipitation that we had. And I think all of us have seen this happening, where we have these relatively warm winters, we don't get as much snow. The snow melts quickly. And so this has quite an impact on runoff production in the winter time. So similar results, I think, for Vanderburgh and Marion County. Southern Indiana doesn't have a great deal of snow to begin with, but snow becomes kind of a rare event by the 2080s. So some of the impact pathways, I think I'll show some pictures of recent events that kind of confirm what is likely happening. But winter flooding and urban stormwater impacts are probably the major impact pathway. There are some positive aspects of this too, less snow removal costs, for example. We also expect to see higher soil moisture in winter and spring, which can cause groundwater flooding or agricultural impacts. Increased erosion and transport of nutrients from farmland in winter is a major source of impacts both to the Great Lakes and the Gulf of Mexico. And we see a lot of degradation of water quality in many downstream rivers and lakes. So just to show some pictures of recent events, here's the aftermath of record-breaking rainfall on August 15th, 2016. This was, according to the historical probability distributions, about a 500-year event. And this is a picture of my son and one of the neighborhood kids canoeing on our park. And you can see this is basically the groundwater level in the park. And all of these houses, and including my house, had some groundwater flooding in the basement. And if you had a finished basement, this caused a lot of damage. So there were a lot of impacts here, and most people didn't have insurance to cover this kind of impact. So in February, we had really an unprecedented flood in the St. Joseph River, which of course goes right through downtown South Bend. The event started with antecedent snowpack on the ground of around pretty much over the whole basin. We had about 18 inches of snow on the ground. That all melted in 3 or 4 days. And then we had 5 inches of rain over 3 days, which is not a big issue. Sorry, my phone was going off there. It was not 5 inches of rain is not a big deal in the summertime. That's very common over 3 days. But in February, it is not common. It's an extreme event. And we wound up having, which by the numbers, a 2,400-year flood, just beyond the pale in terms of flood impacts. And so here's another picture. That's Nokomis Park. Once again, you'll notice the water quality is very different, right? When we have a precipitation event that's extreme, we have clean water. When we have a river flood, we have this brown, inky water filled with raw sewage. We had sewers backing up into people's finished basements. It was a huge mess. Just to show that hydrologists are not immune to these kinds of impacts. This is my basement, which the water was basically knee deep in my basement. And that's all groundwater coming in through cracks in the foundation. So if we look at the future projections for the St. Joseph River, we see that these trends are likely to continue and be exacerbated. So by the 2080s, we see increases in flooding of about 45%. So that the increase in the 100-year flood is 45%, which implies also that the old 100-year flood is increasing in frequency. So we expect these kinds of impacts to continue and get worse. So just a summary of key conclusions to finish up. So Indiana temperatures are projected to increase dramatically with impacts across many sectors. The number of days below freezing will substantially decrease, which creates maybe some advantageous things for agriculture, but also a lot of greater runoff production in the wintertime. Precipitation, again, is expected to increase in winter, spring, with more of this falling as rain, with the implications of flooding that we've already talked about. It's not so clear what's happening with drought. Precipitation in summer could increase or decrease at different times, and there's not a strong consensus in the models regarding simulations of some systematic change in summer precipitation. But extreme precipitation is projected at regional scale, with regional scale climate models, to increase. In other words, even though the summer may be drier or wetter, the extreme storms like extreme thunderstorms and so forth, those are projected to increase in intensity regardless of the signal of the summer overall. So in the interest of time, I'll stop there, and hopefully we can cover any other details in the question and answer session.
Thank you, Alan. I think we'll just pass it over to Alex now and get his presentation, and then we can ask questions at the end. Okay, I know there are some in the chat right now, but I want Alex to have his time to speak too. So Alex? Is he there?
Yeah, one moment, let me pull it up.
Also, Melanie, given that there are 10 of us here, if they run over a little bit, we won't have as many questions to fill up that hour. So Alex, don't worry about running over, because you had mentioned that.
We can't see you, Alex. There you go.
Let me see if I can. Trying to get my camera back on. Sorry about that. Okay. Let me know if you can see my screen. All right, perfect. So my name is Alex Bazán. I'm the Sustainability Project Manager for the City of South Bend. I started in January. Thank you again for giving me this opportunity to speak to you today. So this is the roadmap for the presentation that I put together. So giving an overview of this Office of Sustainability, its mission, the current initiatives that we're working on, and things that we're looking forward to working on in the future, and then just opening it up for discussion. So an overview of the office. So this is our team. So Evie is our Director of Sustainability. She started in June and I started in January. So relatively fresh new office here. We have Barbara, who's our climate fellow that's here for the summer. So some background on the Office of Sustainability in terms of history. So in 2008, Mayor Luckey, he was one of the 1,000 mayors to sign the U.S. Mayor's Climate Protection Agreement. And in 2009, he convened the Green Ribbon Commission, a task force. It was comprised of a task force of community members. They recommended the establishment of a municipal energy office. In 2014, Mayor Pete reconvened that commission to expand the energy office into the Office of Sustainability. In 2016, the Common Council passed a cleaner energy resolution. In 2017, Mayor Pete signed a letter reaffirming their commitment to the Paris Climate Agreement, which is an agreement on reducing emissions to meet the challenge of climate change. In 2018, the Common Council signed with the mayor a letter calling for 100% clean energy by the utility. In 19, the council passed a resolution calling for a climate action plan. That climate action plan was passed in November, and it's called carbon neutral by 2050. So that goal for the city, the overall goal is to become carbon neutral by 2050, so zero carbon pollution by 2050. In 2021, there was some restructuring of the office. So the office originally was part of the Department of Public Works. It's now part of a new department called the Department of Community Investment. So this is just a highlight of that history. So originally the office focused on municipal energy and then went into focusing on sustainability within government operations. And now the Office of Sustainability is focusing on sustainability, climate action through the city as a whole in terms of the community. So the mission of the office, it's to promote solutions that address the climate emergency in South Bend. We do this with three areas of focus, three priorities. So informing, inspiring, illuminating climate solutions, supporting and collaborating on climate initiatives, designing and developing and delivering on those climate solutions. And so this is all these three priorities are rooted within the climate action plan. I don't think I'll be able to see everyone in the chat, but if you could put a thumbs up, or maybe in the chat, let me know if you know of the carbon neutral by 2050 plan for the city. It's a plan that we want all residents to know of and be a part of. But this plan is focused on mitigation. So it's focused on reducing emissions that are causing climate change. That plan could change over time, where it includes, for example, adaptation. What Alan touched on is how do we be prepared and respond to climate change. It could also expand the scope into looking at other strategies, issues that aren't currently within that plan. But at the moment, that climate action plan, the inventory that's part of that plan, which looks at the emissions that contribute to climate change, it is largely, those sources of emission are largely coming from energy and transportation. So the energy that heats and powers and cools your home, your building, and then transportation, the gasoline, the diesel that's fueling the transportation throughout the city. So those are sort of what informs our climate action plan, is having a sense of where those emissions are coming from, and then with that focus on mitigation, on reducing the emissions that are causing climate change, using that inventory to inform our plan. And so based on the climate action plan, that is exactly our focus, which is looking at energy, looking at transportation, so looking at the transition to renewable energy sources. So in most cases, that's solar, increasing energy efficiency, reducing the amount we drive, or offering cleaner modes of transportation. And so just tying that in again to our mission as an office and the three main areas that we work on, we integrate that into everything that are sort of the operations of our office: informing, inspiring, supporting and collaborating, designing and developing those solutions through energy and transportation. So our current initiatives, so this is actually a little bit before I started, but it's one thing that we will do later this year, which is National Drive Electric Week in September. So looking for ways to inform, inspire, educate folks on electric vehicles. This is the Sustainable Solutions Conference in October. So again, providing those opportunities for residents. This is actually an event that I organized in Notre Dame, the Climate Action Accelerator, where I worked with students to do a participatory planning exercise for co-creating together climate solutions that the city could potentially apply into or integrate into its climate action plan. This is a website that we have within our sustainability website, southbendin.gov/gosolar, that's focused on educating folks about the steps they need to take to go solar if they're interested in solar, making it very clear and easy for them to know what they can do and what those steps are to go solar. Let's see, next slide is talking about the green economy. So what profession you're in right now and what that could look like as you advance in your career, potentially looking at green, making your job more greener, looking at it from a green economy perspective. So we do have some online resources like that within our website. Supporting and collaborating. So this is, working with partners on different initiatives. So you might have you may know about Solar United Neighbors, the Solarize Indiana Northern Indiana Co-op. So you might have seen some of their flyers or on their social media. They were working, we were working very closely with them in terms of supporting and promoting the implementation of solar. You may have also be aware of the net metering policy here in the state of Indiana. That deadline just passed. The deadline for net metering was July. And so prior to that deadline, folks that installed solar systems within their home or business, et cetera, if they produce excess solar electricity, they could sell that. They would get a credit from the utility, a full credit. Now that the deadline has passed, that's a partial credit. So before that deadline, we worked very closely with Solar United Neighbors and just in general to let folks know about that deadline. Work with Solar United Neighbors to get as many folks as possible to install solar and benefit from that net metering policy that existed at the time, so that they could get a better return on their investment, benefit more from those potential savings that they would get from solar. So what did that look like? So 19 households in South Bend went solar through the co-op, about 121 kilowatts installed, 245,000 pounds of carbon dioxide avoided each year. So these are just sort of the equivalents of that. We also, and this is actually just around the time that I started, also look to advocate for extending that net metering policy. So this is on Renewable Energy Day, looking for the opportunity and letting the city, the city giving their voice in terms of the opportunity to extend net metering, secure monthly netting, which is another sort of nuance to net metering. To essentially give residents more of an opportunity to benefit from solar. So those are some of the things in terms of collaborating with others. Looking at transportation, so MACOG, Transpo, which is the local, transit, bus transit system here. They have a Connect Transit plan that's in process, which is basically what the future of transit, they're planning the future of transit. So what is it that might look like? So getting feedback from the community through surveys and workshops and other engagement opportunities. So that is another thing. Working in collaboration with these groups to let folks know about that opportunity so that we can have a transit system that works for everyone. Bike to work season, you might have heard of Bike to Work Week or Bike to Work Month. We're working with Michiana Bike to MichianaBikeToWork.org to promote alternative modes of transportation and putting in programming as part of that. So working in collaboration with them to let them know about this opportunity to participate in this Bike to Work season. Design, develop, and deliver. So these are programs specifically within the Office of Sustainability. So looking at energy, the EASSI program. It is the Energy Assistance Solar Savings Initiative. This is a program that I manage that assists nonprofits, community organizations to complete energy efficiency and or solar projects. So we do this through energy assessments, grants, and then also if there's the option to connect them to low interest loans. So we work with partners. IFF has an in-house architect that goes on site to these nonprofits. They do a walkthrough, provide an energy assessment report. We sit down with them and go over that report with them, help them identify what projects they can pursue. And then on top of that, the grant allows them to implement some of those projects through the matching grant. And then CDFI Friendly South Bend, they also are sort of a connector within the community, helping them to connect to different financing options. They could potentially do low interest financing through IFF, although that's not a requirement. So in partnership with these two groups, that is how the EASSI program functions. So the program is structured into cohorts. So we have a spring cohort and a fall cohort. This is our spring cohort. And so these comprise different types of organizations, nonprofits, schools, early childhood education centers, places of worship. So this is sort of, the organizations that through our spring cohort here, we just launched our fall cohort last week. And so these are just some of the organizations that we're working with right now. These are the on-site energy assessments that happen for our fall cohort. So this to the left is the Beacon Resource Center. The middle is the South Bend Civic Theater. The right is near Northwest Neighborhood. So they're actually expanding the solar that they currently have on their rooftop. And then these are just some pictures from the fall cohort. We actually had our on-site energy assessments this past week. And so as well as part of this program, it's about building community, getting the different participating nonprofits to meet one another, journey through the EASSI program, but also learn best practices about just being a nonprofit, a community organization, how they can better serve residents of South Bend. And so that's sort of, the structure of this program. Some preliminary projects. So 4 solar projects coming out of the spring cohort. That's over a combined 380 kilowatts of solar energy potential. That's equivalent to 673,000 pounds of carbon dioxide, 34,000 gallons of gasoline consumed. So these are sort of the equivalents of what that means when you install those projects. 5,000 tree seedlings grown for 10 years. Some other projects as well, LED upgrades, rebalance chillers, efficient HVAC systems, so your heating and cooling systems. Looking at other things that we work on within energy, adding sustainability to small business grants. So the city does have small business grants focused on specific commercial corridors. We're looking at embedding sustainability into that. So that might be, and this is still a work in progress, but we're hoping in the next couple weeks or so, that'll be finalized for these programs where they also have a sustainability element as part of the grants that are serving small businesses. The Solar Energy Workforce Development Program. So we have a pilot program through the city called Upskill South Bend. And this is a broader program for workforce training, workforce development. The Office of Sustainability has provided a solar option through the workforce development. So solar is a growing field, 52% growth is expected between 2020 and 2030. And so that solar element is the NABCEP PV Associate credential. So this is a highly recognized and valued credential that folks in the solar field look for, employers, but also folks that are looking to install their solar systems. They want to know that solar contractors have someone that is NABCEP certified. It's a foundation. It's a credential that's very foundational to installing and managing solar systems. So we have 6 participants that are part of that pilot training program, which requires 32 hours of online training. And then looking at the transportation side of our efforts, installing 9 electric vehicle charging stations. We have 2 of those right now within the city. And we're looking to install some other ones within the downtown area. And so these are the locations that they would be installed in. And so that's in process. Looking ahead, we're planning to update our website to make it more friendly for the public, and to just be more transparent about our efforts and how folks can get involved. We plan to again be part of the National Drive Electric Week in October. In terms of supporting, collaborating that other part of our office, continuing to work and collaborate with the Green Ribbon Commission, and we're working with others in terms of how we can help them in sustainability in reducing their emissions. And then just sort of looking a little bit long term, we're hoping to continue the EASSI program in the following year. So the EASSI program, I didn't mention this, is a brand new program, started essentially when I started. And so we're hoping to renew that program for 2023. Continuing to embed sustainability into small business programs. We have an electric vehicle plan that we're working on in terms of how do we support electric vehicles within the city. Looking at the potential of greener homes, so how we can provide something in terms of making homes more greener within the city, continuing our efforts on expanding solar within the city, Our climate action plan is due for an update. So we're expecting to update that in the coming years. And then the city is also updating their comprehensive plan. So we are also supporting them in that effort in terms of updating their comprehensive plan, which is a massive plan that's updated usually every 30 years or so. That involves, it's essentially a huge policy framework for the city, looking at land use development, economic development, sustainability, transportation. Being supportive and contributing into that development of that plan, which right now is in its very early stages. And so just some things in terms of involvement, how can I get involved, right? So as I mentioned, the climate action plan is in the process of being updated maybe in the next year or two. So that plan is, is our framework for programs and initiatives. And so we really want your voice and for you to own that plan. And we're really hoping that in our update to the plan, we can provide more opportunities for engagement. And so that it's a plan that, folks feel really a part of. We plan to have a survey coming out maybe in the next week or two. And so we could definitely share that with everyone on the call and get your feedback on that as well. Contacting your council members, your mayor, the Office of Sustainability with questions or concerns, letting your council members and mayor know about, things you care about in sustainability is also something you can let them know about as elected officials. Participating in local government engagement opportunities. So for funding new or renewing programs. And there's a lot of cases where, a program is being renewed or updated, or so there might be an announcement about that and seeking feedback from the public regarding that program. And so I've just put a screenshot here of where you could learn some of that. So the news and announcements on the city's main page, its Facebook page also provides a lot of news and updates. I've also, by the way, through the Unitarian Church presentation, have also been working with our communications team to also provide some additional outlets for folks to learn more about the city. And so finding ways that we can make that easier for folks. So that's a thing that's in process as well. Some personal actions. So yeah, I think continuing to have conversations like this, learning more, staying informed, using your voice when you're hearing, learning all this information. This isn't like an exhaustive list, but of course, joining group or forming a group is another thing you can do. These are just some groups and initiatives that are in process or that are very active. Not necessarily endorsements, but just some examples. And of course, there's personal steps you can take to reduce your impact, and I could talk more about that later. And I can even provide a presentation on that as well. And then, of course, voting is super important in terms of, I'm talking to the League of Women Voters here. How do we vote for elected officials that will advocate and support sustainability programs and put budget money towards it, right? I know, Melanie, you mentioned an interest in learning more about the county. I can't speak too much about that. I would recommend reaching out to the county to learn more about their efforts on environmental issues and sustainability. But I have worked with them on some issues, and the county doesn't have a sustainability office or a sustainability point person, but they do work on some sustainability issues. So the solid waste management district, for example, the soil and water conservation district. In most cases, when I do work with them, it's about education and informing residents. And so those are the two areas that, to my knowledge, are the areas that the county is working on in sustainability. So upcoming regional opportunities. So getting back to our focus on transportation. So the Connect Transit Plan, there's an upcoming open house at the downtown library here in South Bend on July 14th. And again, this is about talking about the future of transit. How do folks want to, what's the vision that you want that to look like in terms of providing more transportation options for residents? And then the county as well is updating their comprehensive plan. I'm not as involved in that, but I know it is in process as well. And that's July 27th. You can go to their website to learn more about opportunities to participate with their comprehensive plan. And that's the end of my presentation. I want to thank everyone for the opportunity to speak to here today. Please check out our website. Feel free to email me. I put my personal office email as well as our sustainability office email. If you don't hear from me, feel free to call me. Sometimes our emails, not all the emails come through. Sometimes they get blocked for some reason, just because of our security measures. So if you don't hear back from me, feel free to call me. And of course, please follow our Facebook and Twitter page. We put tips on there and upcoming opportunities. And that's all I have. Happy to answer any questions. And I really hope we can have a conversation about how we can work together, support each other's goals and sustainability, and really just partner on sustainability issues and actions. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much. As we've gone along, we've gotten a lot more questions in the chat. So I'm going to go through them as quickly as I can, except I'm having a hard time getting them. Pam, do you want to start on those? Are you in the chat?
The first one was from Cynthia. And that was just saying what she was interested in doing. And some of that, I don't know if we hit or not, but I'm going to go down to the next one, actually. And it was Elizabeth's question. Have you presented this Indiana-specific and county-specific data to the state legislature and or to the leaders in the majority caucus?
I have not personally presented this to the legislature, but I believe Jeff Dukes, who is the director of the Purdue Climate Change Research Center, which was the lead institution for the INCIA, has presented to the legislature. Indiana's legislature, I think, as you know, is not particularly friendly to the climate change issue. So I think, for example, the INCIA itself was essentially done for free by a collaboration of different universities. And so there was no money from the legislature to fund this, for example. But I think they are certainly aware of it. And many people who interact with the legislature have used the data and information in the reports. And I think that's just as important as presenting to them. So I'll have to ask Jeff what he has actually done and then get back to you.
Okay, thank you. The next one, because that seems, the person who asked, that seems like a very important thing that the league would like to see. It seems that the next is a comment. It seems that these changes will greatly impact healthcare issues as well. Do you have any input on that?
Just to agree. Again, as I mentioned just briefly in the talk, heat-related deaths are the largest weather-related impact pathway. So more people die each year due to heat-related death than any other single combined, including hurricanes, extreme storms, tornadoes. Heat-related deaths are larger. So, and there's a lot of social justice issues embedded in this, right? So people who do not have air conditioning or can't afford to run the air conditioners because of the cost of the utilities, they are highly vulnerable to these events. People who have air conditioning, assuming the power doesn't go out, may be relatively protected and not see any impacts at all. So one thing that South Bend could do, for example, would be to provide cooling refugia in community centers or other places as a way of providing a space where people who don't have air conditioning can go, and particularly older people who are very highly vulnerable to sort of a duration of 3 days of a heat wave. That's when people get dehydrated, and then there are a lot of deaths.
It seems that also if we become wetter, we're going to get wetter, right? as we do that, that's going to change some of the health as well with illnesses and stuff that are more related to humidity or the water and the contamination and that stuff, right?
All true. I think there are, for example, we may see more allergies related to fungal growth and so
Mhm.
forth, or, more extreme ragweed. Those are all kinds of things that could happen. The wetter winters, I think it's probably more in the summertime, where we see maybe greater ozone from other kinds of pollution. And we also might see, like late fall ragweed kind of allergy stuff. The other kinds of things we see are increased impacts to ticks and other disease carrying insects like mosquitoes as well. We see things like West Nile virus moving north and so forth. So short answer to the question is there's a very wide range of health-related impacts, each of which that have been studied by various people, but it's not necessarily a comprehensive source of information about that. So that would be a useful thing to have, actually.
Okay, the next question is, how much did it cost to deal with the impact of basement flooding? And are there projections of the rising costs associated with weather-related damage and displacement caused by climate change?
Also a great question and a very complicated one. So I think the impacts to basements really relates very specifically to whether the basement is finished or unfinished. So in my case, I had to buy a pump, and 3 days of cleanup, whatever my labor is worth. So maybe a couple $1,000s, say. For people who had a finished basement destroyed, maybe could be $20,000. And if you have no insurance, that's all out of pocket. So I'm not aware of a very detailed study trying to assess what the future impacts are. And it's actually very difficult to do with groundwater flooding because we don't have good models necessarily of groundwater flooding in the urban sector. We have better projections, I would say, of surface water flooding, like stormwater impacts, flooding of underpasses, those kinds of things that, destroy people's car engines and those kinds of things. So I'm not aware of a report that says this is how much it's going to cost due to these kinds of impacts. But
Okay.
I think we do know the direction they're expected to go up.
The next two questions are about electric cars, so I'm going to put them together. Might Electric Car Awareness Week include test drives? And does the hybrid vehicle help? Is there a difference between the electric versus hybrid?
Let me get back to you on whether test drives are available. I need to check because I haven't looked back on the details for that specific event. Alan might have some knowledge on electric vehicles as well, but I would say that hybrid vehicles, yes, they do help because they're less fuel intensive. It's like your conventional gasoline powered vehicle, but electric vehicles are completely all electric, right? So they don't require any form of oil, like, gasoline, diesel. But it really boils down to where you're getting your energy from, so the electric vehicle that you plug into the grid, that's all going to be determined by how clean our utility is. So the percent of renewable energy they produce. So, for example, powering in a utility that, let's say, for example, is like 20% renewable energy versus one that's like 40%, right? So that would mean that you're in the 40% scenario of a utility that provides that much energy. That's how much cleaner your electric vehicle is. But in a technical kind of sense, the possibilities for an electric vehicle being even more cleaner is a lot more, because all you have to do is power into a grid that's even more greener, that's providing more cleaner energy, and then you have a much more cleaner transportation system. If that makes any sense, and I can clarify anything that I just said right there. There have been like LCA studies, which are life cycle assessment studies, which are looking at the lifetime of comparing an all-electric vehicle versus a hybrid vehicle or a conventional vehicle, which is typically fueled by gasoline, and then looking at it also by a standard fuel mix that a utility provides to the grid. And in some of those studies, they've shown that even regardless of the energy that the utility provides, an electric vehicle can be a lot more cleaner than your conventional vehicle.
Thank you. Another question was, do you think that the full solar credit could be reinstated?
The solar credit, you're referring to the net metering policy?
I think that's what it means. I mean, that's a political question. I don't know
Yeah, I think
how you feel about answering that.
Yeah, I think I would have to, that would be determined by if we can convince the legislator to change that policy, and that the utilities would also be willing to change that as well. Alan, I think you might have wanted to comment on the electric vehicle, so I'll also mute myself here if you wanted to add to that question.
Just very briefly about the electric vehicles, if you are getting your energy from a coal-fired power plant, your electric vehicle is really a coal-fired vehicle.
Mm-hmm.
If you're getting it from renewable solar resource right next to your house, it's great, right? Then it's a renewable resource. And so just echoing what Alex said,
Mm-hmm.
South Bend actually has a lot of nuclear. So that also is no carbon emissions. So electric vehicles, fairly good from a number of perspectives, especially if you have solar on your house or something.
Yeah. The next question is, the Indiana General Assembly had reduced property owners' incentives to install solar panels. Is there any chance that this might change? If not, are there opportunities to work with the power companies to incentivize clean energy use?
I think this, goes right back to the net metering. That was one of the main incentives that the utilities were offering at the time, but now that is being rescinded. And the argument that's being made is that the utilities don't want to be the region's battery for free. And there's some truth to that. On the other hand, I'm very frustrated with these policies because we're all supposed to be doing everything we can to reduce our carbon footprint, and that includes solar. So for example, we have other problems. The legislature has also allowed the utilities to limit the size of the systems that are installed on houses based on your electric bill. So if you're hyper efficient about your conserving energy, you actually are penalized and not allowed to put a large solar array on your house. And if you ask me why that is, I just had this happen to me. So I had to compromise and have a much smaller solar array than my roof would support because I had been conserving energy too well. There's a lot of policies that are dysfunctional, and I think they can be reversed over time, but it's going to take time.
The next question is, sorry.
It's just a question of politics, really, in convincing the legislator. And I think that's a lot of what, like, Solar United Neighbors that I mentioned is really trying to highlight is is net metering, and then hopefully getting folks to contact their local elected officials and raise that question and those issues that Alan just raised. And those are also some things that I've experienced just managing the EASSI program, or those nonprofits that were very much interested in going solar and benefiting from that net metering policy before the deadline. So we really had to make a push to get all the paperwork in, because there is definitely a process of not just getting quotes, working with contractors, working with the utility, all the internal and formal deadlines to make that possible. So there's definitely challenges there just to meet that deadline. So yeah, I think it's a question of politics.
The next question here is that, has the Biden administration, including Secretary Buttigieg, done anything specific to incentivize cities and families to move towards sustainable energy and transportation options? The specific was in capitals.
I'd have to look at that more in detail, but we, like, for example, we have ARP funding, so the American Rescue Plan dollars. And so some of that money is going to things like transportation. The EASSI program, for example, right now is fully funded by the American Rescue Plan dollars, so ARP dollars. So some of that is related to the grant dollars that the federal government is providing at the state level, and then also to the cities. So I think in some way I'd have to like follow the trail, but like, yeah, the federal government is through those recovery funds, allowing cities to make efforts in energy and transportation.
I think, promoting electric vehicles is another aspect of this. I'm not sure what funds are available to promote that, but certainly that's being put forward as a sustainable activity that is suggested.
Yeah, there's a lot of funds for electric vehicle charging stations. MACOG is managing a lot of those grant dollars. So that's the Michiana Council of Governments. Some of that money is coming from the state. I think some of it's from the federal. So yeah, there's definitely money that the federal government is incentivizing and to prepare for an all-electric future. So putting in that infrastructure. So yeah.
There are two questions here, and I don't know, we're after one. I don't know how people feel about staying, but I'll read them quickly, and if we can get a quick answer, or maybe you wouldn't mind, well, let me just read them. Is a 50-50 match required for the EASSI grant? Also, what company does the installation, and does the city decide, or does the organization decide?
Yeah, so the 50-50 matching, so the grant for the EASSI program is a 50% matching grant up to $10,000. So, if they spend $20,000, we match them $10,000. We have a minimum requirement, so which is $5,000. So if they spend $5,000, we match them $2,500. If they spend more than $20,000, the matching grant through the city will be $10,000. The nonprofit can decide on any company they want to go with, whether that's solar or any energy efficiency contractor. The city doesn't decide on contractors or companies that nonprofits want to go with.
Good. And the last question is, well, it's a two-part question. The state has penalized some energy efficiencies, for example, raising the wheel tax for hybrid electric vehicles. Any influence on changing it, especially with the strong growth in e-vehicles? And what is the policy on tree planting and removal?
All right. Well, I think like the first question, right, is similar to like, as Alan has mentioned, is like, it's a question, I think, of politics, of how do you of changing the legislator, like convincing the legislator that these are things that we should incentivize. So if we wanted to change, for example, the wheel tax to encourage more hybrid electric vehicles. So I think that's a question of politics. The policy on tree planting and removal, I'd have to look back at our city ordinance on that. We do have like an ecological advocacy committee. And so they would be the best point of contact for that. So yeah, I'd have to look if there's like something specific there. I know like they do have in that ordinance where they're promoting, of course, native plants over invasive plants. So they do have that element as part of it, but I'd have to look more specifically on like the policy for planting and removal, and like what their rule is for substituting one tree removal when they do it.
Well, one of the last comments here is, it says a lot of this comes down to politics and comes down to vote, 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 which we at the League of Women Voters are very interested in. So I thank you for staying over. I want to thank you both, Alex and Alan, for coming here and talking to us. We really appreciate it. And we have a lot more information now. And we'd like to work with the city and the county on many of these issues. So thank you both for your expertise. We really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for inviting us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Very good. Thank you very much, everybody, and have a really wonderful day. And we'll see everybody back on the second Friday of August. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.